We look like queens, but we eat filth to keep our crown. We live a life most women would dream of, private jets, diamonds, mansions. But behind the gold, there's a price we must pay. A dark, disturbing price. Let's dive into the truth of what keeps us at the top. But before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Talia never thought she'd end up here. She grew up in a small, run-down apartment in the heart of the city, where dreams of luxury felt like a distant fantasy. Her mother worked long hours at a local diner, and her father, long gone, had left them with nothing but broken promises. But Talia, she was different. She had ambition, a fire that burned brighter than most, and a single goal: escape. Escape from the cramped rooms, the constant worry about bills, and the endless struggle to make ends meet. Talia wasn't content with just surviving. She wanted more. She wanted the life that others only dreamed about. It wasn't just the diamonds, the mansions, or the designer clothes. No, it was more than that. It was the power, the respect, the luxury that came with being someone important. And when she met him, David Brooks, the powerful politician, Talia thought she had found her way out. He was everything she'd ever wanted: wealthy, influential, and surrounded by luxury. He promised her a life she could only imagine in her wildest dreams. Talia was hooked, and before long she was his bride, living in the lap of luxury, just as she had always imagined. But what Talia didn't know, what no one told her, was that her dream life would come with a price so dark, so unimaginable, that it would change everything she thought she knew about happiness, power, and success. The life Talia had dreamed of came at a cost that would weigh on her soul in ways she couldn't have foreseen. Behind the perfect smile, the expensive gowns, and the sparkling chandeliers, there was something much darker, something so twisted, so hidden, that she would soon be forced to confront it in a way she never thought possible. Talia had everything she ever wanted, but the luxury, the power, and the respect came with a price she was unprepared for. Little did she know what awaited her every Sunday would make her question everything she thought she knew about the world and about herself. Her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine, and the truth of what she would face behind closed doors was far more disturbing than she could have ever imagined. The first few weeks in Chief Adabelli's world were like a dream come true for Talia. The luxury was overwhelming: private jets, silk sheets, lavish dinners. Every desire she had once imagined was now at her fingertips: the grand estate, the exotic vacations, the expensive gifts. But it didn't take long for something to feel off. At first, she told herself it was just the weight of her new life, the pressure of living up to expectations, to be the perfect wife of a powerful politician. But soon, the signs began to creep in, subtle, unsettling hints that something wasn't quite right. She couldn't put her finger on it, at least not at first. Talia started noticing strange behaviors among the staff. The servants, who once seemed so polished and respectful, began to act distant, almost fearful when they looked at her. Conversations hushed the moment she entered the room. Whispers lingered in corners, their words too soft to catch, but Talia could feel the tension building. She overheard bits and pieces, words that didn't make sense, like first Sunday rituals and the cost of loyalty. The other wives, beautiful, elegant women, who seemed as perfect as the life they led, also behaved strangely. There was an unspoken bond between them, a silence that spoke volumes. They carried themselves with a grace that seemed almost too practiced, their smiles just a little too rehearsed. And when they looked at Talia, there was a flicker of something between pity and warning, something she couldn't yet understand. She didn't ask questions. She was too focused on what she had gained, the wealth, the status. What did it matter if there were oddities? After all, wasn't it worth it? But soon, the whispers grew louder. And one evening, after the staff had left for the night, she overheard something she would never forget. the sound of her husband, Chief Adabelli, speaking in hushed tones with his closest confidants. He mentioned something about keeping the crown. Talia froze, her heart racing. She had no idea what that meant, but she could sense the unease in the air. The words felt like a threat, an invisible hand tightening around her throat. And then there was that strange smell. It lingered in the air for days, something sharp, almost metallic. Talia tried to ignore it, but it clung to the walls, to the furniture. She was starting to feel suffocated by the world she thought would bring her freedom. But there were moments of weakness, moments where she caught a glimpse of something dark beneath the surface. She had seen it in his eyes, the coldness, the emptiness that came when he spoke of power. It was there, in his calm voice, when he told her she was to remain by his side. No questions, no hesitation. But she had made the choice to marry him, right? She had chosen this life. And the allure of it all, the wealth, the position, the respect, kept her tethered, even when the doubts started to creep in. The whispers, the coldness, the strange behaviors, it all started to make her question her decision. But no matter how much she began to suspect, the allure of the riches she now lived in was impossible to ignore. She told herself that maybe she was just overthinking things, that this was the price of living a life so many others only dreamed of. But the truth was, she hadn't even begun to understand the cost. What she was about to learn would change her life forever. No one had warned her about the rituals, and no one ever could. Then everything changed. It was the first Sunday of the month, and Talia had no idea what to expect. At first, it seemed like any other day, another lavish breakfast, another afternoon spent in her designer clothes, another evening in front of a fireplace that could have been plucked straight from a movie set. But that evening, something felt different. There was an unspoken tension in the air, a heaviness that hung over the mansion like a storm cloud. Talia had never seen the other wives so distant. They were quieter than usual, their eyes avoiding hers. Their usual grace seemed to falter just for a moment, and then, as the clock struck 6, it began. Talia was summoned to the private chambers of Chief Adabelli. The staff moved with a sense of urgency, whispering under their breath as they prepared the room. Something about the way they looked at her made her heart race, but she couldn't bring herself to ask questions. She followed the housekeeper, a tightness in her chest, into a lavishly decorated room. Candles flickered in the dim light, casting long shadows on the walls, and the air was thick with a strange metallic scent. In the center of the room stood a long, low table covered with intricately designed bowls. Her husband stood near the table, his presence towering, calm, expectant. He was the only one not acting strange, yet his eyes were cold, calculating, like he knew exactly what was coming. The other wives were already there, seated in silence, their eyes glazed over in a way Talia had never seen before. They were waiting. For what? Her breath caught in her throat as she noticed the look in their eyes, the same emptiness she had seen in her husband's, and it was then that she understood. The truth, the dark truth that she had been too naive to see, was about to reveal itself. The first Sunday ritual wasn't just some family tradition. It wasn't about maintaining peace or honor. No, it was a twisted, grotesque ceremony designed to maintain control, to keep them all in their place. The moment she stepped forward, Chief Adabelli's cold voice broke the silence. "You will partake," he said, his words heavy, final. Talia's body froze. She looked down at the bowls, her stomach turning in knots. The scent grew stronger, unbearable, like something rotting in the air. And as she glanced back at the other wives, she saw the truth in their faces. This was the price they had paid for their place, the price they still had to pay. There was no turning back now. A servant, his face hidden behind a mask, stepped forward and lifted the lid from one of the bowls. Talia recoiled, her breath quickening. Inside was something unrecognizable, thick, dark, and vile. Her stomach churned as the servant handed her a small spoon. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, but there was no choice. The ritual had already begun. The room was silent except for the sound of Talia's heartbeat in her ears, the other wives eating their share with mechanical precision. There was no hesitation in their movements, no sign of fear. It was as if they had done this before, many times before. Talia looked at the bowl in front of her. Her mind screamed to run, to escape, but her body was paralyzed. She had made her choice, hadn't she? She had chosen wealth. She had chosen power. And now the cost was laid bare in front of her, unavoidable. She lifted the spoon to her mouth, and for the first time, Talia knew what it truly meant to be trapped. The taste was beyond description, revolting, unbearable. Her body screamed in protest, but she couldn't stop. She had to finish. She had no choice. The wives continued to eat, and the world she thought she had entered with the promise of a perfect life, diamonds, mansions, power, now felt like a cage, a gilded cage that she could never leave. Talia's world had shifted in that moment. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. If this part is making sense, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's really watching to this point, and tell us what you think will happen next. What would you do if you were in her shoes? Would you stay for the riches, or risk it all to escape? The days that followed the ritual were like a fog. Talia went through the motions, dinners, parties, shopping sprees, but every smile felt hollow, every word from her husband felt like it came from a stranger. She was surrounded by luxury, yes, but it no longer felt like freedom. It felt like a prison. Her mind was in chaos. The taste from that first Sunday ritual still lingered in her mouth, no matter how many times she tried to wash it away. But it wasn't just the taste that haunted her. It was the feeling of betrayal, the deep disgust that filled her every time she thought about what she had done. How could she have let herself be part of something so vile? Every Sunday now, the ritual was part of her life. She had no choice but to participate. At first, the thought of leaving, of walking away from all the wealth, the power, the status, seemed impossible. She had sacrificed so much to get here. What would happen to her if she left? Would she end up just like the others, stuck in a life she had spent so long trying to escape? But slowly, doubt began to creep in. Talia started to wonder if it was worth it. The price of luxury, the price of wealth. Was this life really worth the degradation, the loss of her dignity? She had entered this world hoping to escape her past, but now she was living in a nightmare. The house, the jewels, the designer clothes, they had all lost their allure. What was the point of all of it if she had to lose herself in the process? She found herself staring out of the mansion's windows one night, watching the world go by. It felt so distant, like she was trapped in a bubble. She was no longer the person she used to be, the woman she had once been. The girl who dreamed of power and success was vanishing piece by piece. "Is it worth it?" she asked herself quietly, her voice almost a whisper. But even as the words left her lips, she already knew the answer. No, it wasn't. But then the real question hit her. Could she ever leave? She was too deep in now. The more she tried to pull away, the more she felt the invisible chains tighten around her. The lifestyle she had once dreamed of had a grip on her that she couldn't escape. Talia knew she was at a breaking point. She had begun to hate herself for what she was becoming. She had longed for this life, but now it felt like a curse. The freedom she once imagined had turned into a suffocating weight, and the more she tried to breathe, the harder it became. But leaving wasn't an option. Not now. She had spent too long building her life around this world, and the thought of losing it all, it was too much to bear. But as much as she hated it, Talia knew she was trapped, and no matter how much she tried to fight it, she couldn't escape. But Talia would soon learn that escaping wasn't as easy as walking away. She was deeper in than she thought. Talia could feel the walls closing in around her, the pressure of her choices threatening to crush her. For months, she had fought the urge to speak out, to say something, anything, to expose the nightmare that had become her life. But fear of losing everything, fear of the consequences, had kept her silent. She had watched in silence as the other wives bore the same weight, their eyes hollow, their faces masked with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. But something had changed. The silence was no longer an option. It started with a simple conversation between Talia and the other wives one evening, in the privacy of her room. As the weight of their shared experience settled between them, Talia finally said it aloud. "We have to do something." It wasn't just the ritual anymore. It wasn't just about the unspeakable horror they were forced to endure every first Sunday. It was about the lies they had all been living for years, the lives built on manipulation and deceit, all for the sake of power. Their silence had allowed it to continue, but they couldn't be silent anymore. And so, they made a decision. The decision to expose the truth. They would no longer stand by and let their lives be used as pawns in Chief Adabelli's game. The truth would be told, no matter the cost. The wives knew the risk. Chief Adabelli was not just a politician. He was a force, untouchable, his influence stretching into every corner of the political world. His power was so deep, so ingrained, that to speak out against him was to risk everything. Everything they had worked for, everything they had sacrificed. But what was the cost of silence now? How much longer could they live in fear of the man they had once hoped would deliver them to the heights of wealth and influence? With the help of one brave journalist, they orchestrated a public interview. It wasn't easy. There were threats, veiled warnings, but they moved forward anyway. Talia, the youngest of the wives, spoke first. Her voice, though trembling at first, grew stronger with each word. She spoke of the rituals, of the degrading ceremonies, of the price they had paid for their gilded lives. She spoke of the fear they had lived with, the lives they had been forced to live behind closed doors. And one by one, the other wives followed her lead, their voices shaking, but resolute. The world watched in stunned silence. The revelations were nothing short of explosive. The wives, once seen as the epitome of grace and beauty, were now being painted as victims, but victims who had come forward to break the chains that had bound them. The political world trembled. Chief Adabelli's dark practices, the horrifying rituals, the control he wielded over their lives. Suddenly, it was all out in the open. The system he had built to maintain his power was collapsing piece by piece. But as they spoke, as the truth spilled out, the consequences became clear. What had seemed like a brave act of rebellion now felt like a betrayal. To the world they were heroes, courageous women exposing the darkness of a powerful man. But to Chief Adabelli and his network of loyalists, they had become enemies, traitors to be silenced at all costs. The wives knew they weren't just risking their social status or wealth. They were risking their lives. In the days that followed, the threats came, the phone calls, the emails, the whispered warnings. Chief Adabelli's men were everywhere, watching, waiting for the right moment. They knew this was just the beginning. Exposing the truth had set something in motion. There was no turning back now. Talia felt the weight of the danger more keenly than anyone. She had spent so long chasing power, chasing wealth, and now she was about to lose it all. But something had shifted inside her. The guilt, the shame. She had lived with it long enough. She had crossed a line, and though the fear gripped her heart, the sense of liberation was even stronger. She had done the right thing. Do you think they should have exposed the truth, or would you have stayed silent? Let us know in the comments below. The days that followed the wives' revelation were nothing short of chaotic. The world was watching, and for the first time, the veil of power and control that Chief Adabelli had woven around himself began to tear. News outlets, social media, political circles, Everywhere, the story of his dark practices spread like wildfire. The power he had so carefully built over decades began to crumble under the weight of public outrage. The people, once in awe of him, now saw him for what he truly was, a man who would sacrifice anything and anyone for power. But it wasn't just the public who turned against him. As the truth spread, the very foundation of Chief Adabelli's political empire began to shake. His allies, once loyal and eager to bask in his power, started to distance themselves. The whispers of betrayal began. Those closest to him, the ones who had profited from his influence, began to turn away, their loyalty shattered by the truth that had been exposed. His support network, which had once been impenetrable, began to unravel before his eyes. The doors that had once been open to him began to close. What had once been an ironclad fortress of control was now full of cracks. The political system that had supported him for so long was now fractured, and every move he made seemed to push him further into isolation. The public, once in awe of his power, now condemned him. His wealth, his status, his connections, none of it could shield him from the consequences of the truth. But just when it seemed that victory was within their grasp, the women began to realize the true cost of what they had done. One evening, as Talia sat in the mansion's study, watching the news coverage, she felt a chill run down her spine. The coverage seemed too smooth, too polished, as if someone was trying to control the narrative. She turned to the others, each of them feeling the same unsettling sensation. They had exposed the truth, but something still didn't feel right. There was still a weight in the air, a sense of danger that lingered despite the supposed downfall of Chief Adabelli. Then came the twist. The phone rang in the dead of night. Talia didn't recognize the number, but something told her to answer. The voice on the other end was low, barely above a whisper, but it was unmistakable. It was one of Adabelli's former allies. He spoke in hushed tones, his words tinged with panic. "They know you're still alive. They're coming for you. Don't trust anyone." Before she could ask any more questions, the line went dead. A cold sweat covered her skin as she realized what was happening. Adabelli wasn't done. His fall from grace hadn't been complete. He was fighting back, and he wasn't doing it alone. Talia's heart pounded in her chest. The walls around her seemed to close in as she realized the truth. Chief Adabelli wasn't just trying to salvage his reputation. He was coming for them. The women were no longer just pawns in his game. They were the targets. The moment they exposed him, they had sealed their own fate. There was no escaping the consequences of their actions. The betrayals, the threats, the men who had once worked with him, they were still out there, watching, waiting. Adabelli wasn't finished with them yet, and they were marked. They had spoken the truth, but now they had to face the price. And as the women gathered together, the realization hit them all like a ton of bricks. Speaking out had cost them more than their place in his world. It had cost them their safety, their peace, and perhaps even their lives. But even as Chief's power crumbled, the women realized that speaking the truth had come with a price. They were marked forever. As the days passed, Talia found herself staring at the life she had once longed for, now shattered beyond repair. The mansion, once a symbol of her dreams, felt like a hollow shell. The glimmer of gold, once a reflection of success, now seemed to mock her every decision. She and the other wives had walked into this world with hopes of freedom, of luxury, but what they had found instead was a cage, its bars made of wealth, ambition, and secrets too dark to ever escape. But now, with everything exposed, there was no more hiding. There was no more pretending that the riches, the power, the beautiful facade they had all so carefully built would make them happy. For what was it worth if, in the end, their souls were sold? Talia sat down, surrounded by the other wives who had once been her allies in this world. They were no longer the polished, perfect women they had been when they first entered Chief Adabelli's life. They were worn, scarred by the truth they had uncovered. But in their eyes, there was something else now. Clarity. They had seen the price of ambition, the cost of silence, and the toll of living in a gilded cage. The days of luxury had come at a steep price. They had gained everything they had ever wanted, but at the cost of their humanity. They had traded their dignity for power, and in return, they had found themselves trapped. Their journey had been one of betrayal, not just from the man they had loved, but from themselves. They had allowed themselves to be controlled by the very thing they had sought: wealth. As Talia looked back, she saw it clearly. She had walked into a world that promised everything, but gave her nothing but emptiness. She had chosen the wealth and the power over her own freedom, and now, in this broken aftermath, she realized the cost was far too great. The fear, the guilt, the regret, these were the true prices she had paid. Justice had been served, yes. Chief Adabelli's reign was over. His empire was in ruins. But even in his downfall, the women realized that they, too, were left with their own kind of ruin. What was justice if it left you broken, scarred, and without the life you had once longed for? What was the price of speaking the truth, of shattering the facade they had all worked so hard to maintain? The consequences were clear, and now there was no going back. They had been marked forever, not just by the man they had exposed, but by the choices they had made. In the end, they had learned that the truth, while freeing, didn't come without its own chains. They had exposed the darkness within Chief Adabelli's world, but in doing so, they had exposed the darkness within themselves. In the end, Talia's story reminds us that wealth and power may come with glittering gold, but underneath it, there can be chains, both seen and unseen. And sometimes the truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing that can set us free. The aftermath of everything that had unfolded left Talia with more questions than answers. Was the truth worth the price they had paid? Could they ever truly escape the consequences of what they had done? As she looked at the others, she knew they would never be the same. Their lives, once defined by power and luxury, were now defined by something far more profound. The luxury had been a lie, the power had been fleeting, but the truth, no matter how harsh, was the only thing that could never be taken away from them. What do you think really happened in this story? Was justice served, or did the price of speaking out cost them too much? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this. Did Talia make the right choice? How far would you go for money and power? Share your thoughts with us.